Good evening, dear listener. Tonight, as the world hushes into stillness and the stars blink softly above us, we slip into the velvet folds of the past. The day's noise has faded, and only the slow rhythm of your breath remains, rising and falling like the tide. Inside, a fire crackles quietly, and tapestries flutter as if breathing. You are no longer yourself, not quite. You are someone else, or perhaps everyone at once, wandering the private world of medieval royalty. A world gilded in beauty, burdened with ritual, and shadowed by silence. Let the present dissolve like morning mist over a moor. You are warm, safe, and still. His job: to wake the sovereign and help with the most private of needs, to assist in washing, dressing, and releving themselves. A strange closeness, isn't it? Yet this man held secrets deeper than any knight. He knew what no one else dared to know. Every inch of the body is managed, cleaned, protected, adored and judged. Have you ever worn clothes so heavy with symbols that you forgot how your own skin feels? Above the ceiling arches, like the rib cage of a sleeping giant. First, the fire is stoked. Water is warmed in silver basins. Her ladies-in-waiting form a choreography of brushes, combs, and cosmetics applying beeswax to lips. Crushing berries for rouge, arranging hair into coiled braids heavy with pins and pearls. A modest one bread dipped in milk, perhaps a dried fig, a bite of cheese. Somewhere in the kitchen hall, a pig is being prepared for roasting. All things in this world have their function. Even the animals serve the crown. But does anyone ever ask what the crown serves? Each word must weigh something. Each glance is strategy. Behind every polite nod may lie suspicion, calculation, even fear. One wrong choice and an alliance may fray, a rival may rise. This quiet before everything begins, the human lingers beneath the crown. Tired, dreaming, perhaps even afraid. Royalty, for all its gold and velvet, begins as breath, as warmth, as skin. Just like you, just like anyone. To be royal is to be always in the middle of a quiet storm. And have you ever tried to sleep inside a storm? Royalty do not gorge in the morning. Appetite must be saved for ceremony. They eat in near silence, flanked by pages and stewards, observed even in the act of chewing. It is said that some monarchs developed elaborate habits just to stall for a moment of solitude, tapping fingers, fiddling with napkins, pretending to contemplate scripture, small rebellions hidden in plain sight. A queen's beauty is not her own. It is a symbol, a banner, a mirror in which the realm sees its future. But how long can a face bear that much meaning? Robes are chosen embroidered with threads of real gold, their weight almost punishing. The ruler is lifted, not always by strength, but by duty, by routine, by 1,000 years of expectation. One servant sponges the face with rose water. Another rubs perfumed oil into the hands. Another holds out linen undergarments, stiff with starch. A parade of faces and ranks. The chamberlain, the steward, the master of the hunt, the seneschal. Their voices are low but urgent. There are matters to discuss: land disputes, tax arrears, foreign gifts, letters from distant dukes, and wood smoke, and the mirrors have not yet reflected judgment. Act. Before politics and ceremony, before masks are fixed tightly upon faces, there is this brief moment. A breath, a pause. A murmur of silk as a robe is lifted. A flash of bare feet on cold stone. A servant reads the day's petitions aloud, his voice echoing against the stone walls. Around you hang tapestries depicting saints and battles, their threads gleaming gold in the firelight. A crown rests nearby on a stand of blackened iron, empty now but always watching. Without divine sanction, they are just a body in cloth. And so, they shuffle in slippered feet to a private chapel. A space carved with sacred vines and angelic faces. The air smells of beeswax and old incense. And the only light comes from stained glass windows, bleeding blue and red onto the stone floor. The monarch's eyes flutter beneath closed lids. Perhaps they dream of hawks and battlefields, or perhaps of nothing at all.
Here the monarch kneels,
joints aching under the pressure of regalia. Here they are no longer king or queen, but sinner. One must humble before rising. Even God must approve this day's rule. Did you know that some monarchs wept during communion not from guilt, but from the weight of being believed divine? Sleep for a king or queen is not simple. Rested is performance delayed, burden postponed. Hooves clatter in the courtyards, banners flutter on battlements, and the kitchens below rumble with the rattle of copper pots. But here, in this early hour, time is syrupy and slow. The monarch rises from prayer, slightly stiff from kneeling. Their breath fogs in the cool air as they pass back into the warmth of their chambers, where their spouse has also begun to stir. The bed at the chamber's center is a fortress of furs, velvet canopies, and down-stuffed linens, piled high and tucked with ceremonial care. Even in sleep, royalty must appear divine. And in this quiet space between waking and dream, you are ready to drift gently through time. A raven croaks once from a nearby tower before flapping off into the fading dark. In the chamber, everything is hushed, save the crackling of fire and the soft shifting of servants just beyond the door. They wait for permission to begin the day. Have you ever wondered what it might feel like to be watched even while you sleep? Beyond the veil of centuries, the stone walls of a great castle emerge, cold and grand, wrapped in ivy and fog. The chamber is vast and dim, warmed only by a hearth that glows with low embers, its light dancing across carved oak beams. Outside the narrow arrow-slit windows, the air is damp and still. Beneath those heavy linens lies a body that rules a nation. Soon a knock, 3 soft taps. It is the groom of the stool and attendant, whose name may cause a smirk today, but whose role was once intimate and vital. As the monarch stirs, a team of servants enters in practiced silence. There is no modesty here. Privacy does not exist. Once dressed, the monarch is not yet themselves not fully. The chaplain waits, already reciting morning prayers in Latin. Outside the chapel, the world has begun to move. The queen's mourning is no less ornate. Breakfast is taken standing. Cat stretches near the hearth, unnoticed. Birds chirp beyond the high glass windows. Soon, the royal household assembles in the great hall. The monarch listens, nods, speaks in measured tones. And so begins the royal day. But for now, let's remain here in the stillness of the bedchamber, where the air still carries the scent of rosewater in this space. Shall we see where the day takes them next? The lantern-esque glow softens as you pass beneath the stone archway into a more intimate part of the royal residence. Beyond the great bedchamber, past the sacred hush of the chapel, lies a curious room. Small, surprisingly plain, and always attended by one man alone. He stands in the shadows now, hands clasped, eyes lowered. Not a noble, not quite a servant, but something more peculiar. There are no trumpets here, no audience, no parchment or scroll. Just 2 people, one robed in power, the other in knowledge. Another might complain about a nagging pain, or a noble's insolence, or a child who refuses to speak. Sometimes they may simply groan, tired from the endless weight of pretending. The groom records none of this, yet he remembers everything. And in remembering, he gains something few at court ever do: intimacy. Some historians believe that the groom's influence was so strong, he could manipulate appointments, steer conversation, even engineer alliances. He walks tall, his back straight beneath a velvet cloak, his crown glinting in the rising light. Who knows everything and speaks nothing? Perhaps you've known someone like that, a quiet observer, a confidant, someone always there but rarely seen. In this peculiar figure of history, we find a paradox. A man given influence not through battle or birth, but through quiet service. And here was a man who sat quietly with a monarch at his most vulnerable, hearing things no advisor or ambassador ever could. It is said that even enemies of the crown attempted to bribe or flatter the groom, but the best ones, the most loyal, never spoke a word. They were vaults, and they carried their monarch's secrets to the grave. What would it be like to be remembered not for the battles you fought or the laws you passed behind him? The groom returns to his post, a ghost at the heart of the palace. But for the silent, steady loyalty you offered in the smallest of acts, in a world where power was loud and crowns were heavy, perhaps the quietest role was the most enduring. And is that not a kind of power in itself? Courtiers bow, trumpets sound. The mask is back in place. In medieval times, the answer may have rested in the eyes of a man holding a basin, a man you would never thank publicly, but without whom your dignity might crumble. Other nobles, adorned in armor and titles, would strain to hear the latest gossip, but the groom already knew it all. His role was renamed, softened, folded into other duties. But echoes remain. In every private secretary, every chief of staff, every whispered word behind a closed door, there is still someone holding secrets. Attending the vulnerable, shaping power from the shadows. When Henry VIII reigned his groom of the stool, Sir Anthony Denny, became one of the most influential men in England, he controlled access to the king in his final years. Others broke wind in council meetings. History may have polished their images, but behind closed doors, many monarchs were flawed, foolish, even crude. The groom saw it all. And yet despite this, or perhaps because of it, he remained loyal. There is something noble in that tan honesty, born from knowing the whole person, not just the crown. Filtering messages, denying visits, even shielding the dying monarch from unpleasant truths. Yet somewhere, deep in the chambers behind him, the groom returns to his chair, folds the linens anew, and waits. Tomorrow, this will all repeat. And in a court where whispers held more weight than words, that made him dangerous. Trusted, feared, all because he knew what others preferred to forget. The groom asks no questions, speaks only when spoken to. These men could influence royal moods, sway decisions, or warn of treachery. The groom steps back into silence, fading like smoke as the monarch departs, now ready to face the ceremonial flood ahead. And yet something lingers, not dirt, not shame. Something simpler. The understanding that even kings are creatures of the flesh. And no matter how embroidered the robe, or how jeweled the crown, the body beneath is vulnerable, unpredictable, entirely human. As ridiculous as the title may sound today, to be the groom was to be closer to the sovereign than even the queen. Does it not say something strange about power that even at its height, it hinges on those willing to do the humblest things? He offers cloth, water, a hand if needed, but he also listens. Because it is in these rare, unmasked moments that the monarch sometimes speaks truly. And can you imagine what truths have been spoken in such strange privacy? This is the groom of the stool, and though history may smirk at the title, there was a time when this man knew the king better than anyone alive. He is not a joke. Not to those who served. His role, you see, was born of necessity, grown into ceremony, and wrapped in layers of quiet trust. A heavy chair carved from dark oak, its center hollowed and lined with polished copper. Beneath it, a ceramic chamber pot sits ready. Nearby, linens folded precisely. A basin of water steamed faintly, infused with herbs like lavender and rosemary to mask the less pleasant smells. Candles flicker in wall sconces, casting flickering shadows like moving faces across the stone walls. The chamber is cleaner than most in the castle hygiene, while rudimentary by our standards, was a strange sort of luxury in the medieval court. For every monarch, no matter how mighty, must he tanned, therefore, inevitably must. But in a world where dignity was everything, even the act of digestion became an affair of state. The groom of the stool was not only there to assist with the bodily process, but to attend, advise, and report. Imagine confiding in someone while half-dressed. Could that person become your closest ally? The room itself is simple, so the king enters, already cloaked in layers of embroidered silk, attended by this silent man. One king may confess anxieties about a foreign alliance. In fact, by the Tudor period, the groom of the stool was often a noble himself, a position of such trust that kings would select favorites for the role. Afterward, the king rises. His body is washed once more. Linen is changed. A splash of rose water behind the ears. This brief, intimate ritual grounds the monarch before the storm of politics begins. Now, as the sovereign steps back into the royal hall, none of this shows. What becomes of a man who is so near to power and yet never truly part of it? Later accounts suggest that grooms were sometimes envied, even resented. In the fragile ecosystem of court, information was currency. Of course, not every ruler was so restrained. Some kings drank heavily in the morning. It raises a curious thought, doesn't it? Who do we become when the mask slips? We're unwashed, undone, unguarded? The groom of the stool faded from prominence in the late 17th century as notions of privacy evolved and modern plumbing emerged. So as we drift gently from this chamber of stone and ritual, let us pause for a moment and wonder, and as the lantern's glow fades completely, replaced by sunlight spilling into the corridor, the monarch walks forward into another Dackling, composed and cloaked in illusion. Are you ready to follow the monarch into the chapel now, where incense thickens and Latin echoes fill the cold air? At twilight's edge, the stained glass windows of the royal chapel begin to shimmer with gold and garnet light. Sunlight, slanting through the high arches, strikes the floor in colored puddles, soft and shifting. The chamber smells of beeswax, cold stone, and a trace of myrrh, left from morning prayers. Here beneath the vaulted ceiling of carved angels and creeping ivy patterns, the monarch prepares not for war or feast, but for silence. The incense curls upward, disappearing into the rafters. There is no crown upon the king's head here. He wore a hair shirt beneath his royal robes to remind himself of humility, and regularly invited beggars to dine with him. And so each prayer, each solemn procession, was part devotion, part theater. But how much belief was real and how much for show? Her voice rises in harmony with the king's, though softer, gentler, less expected to lead. Yet her presence is vital. In a world where piety and purity are bound up in a queen's image, her devotions are closely watched. The ladies behind her take note of every gesture, the way she folds her hands, the way her eyes close during the Kyrie. Their own fortunes may depend on how perfectly they mirror her stillness. Henry IV of England, tormented by guilt after seizing the throne from his cousin, was said to suffer nightmares in the chapel itself, visions of betrayal, blood, and a crown too hot to touch. Others, like the Carolingian Emperor Charlemagne, reportedly wept at communion, convinced he had failed both his people and his God. Time itself bent around worship. Meals were planned around Mass. Diplomacy paused for liturgy. Even war campaigns stopped on holy days. For kings and queens, faith was not privateer. It was public posture and personal ritual woven so tightly they became indistinguishable. Some historians wonder whether the most devout-seeming rulers secretly doubted in the quiet of their own minds. One misstep, one rumor of pride or irreverent, and a lifetime of prayer could unravel. Piety was both shield and trap, and in that paradox lies the uneasy balance of royal faith. When every gesture is seen, how do you know if your soul is your own? Between sacred duty and silent fear, in the chapel's quiet, in the murmured prayers and candlelit stairs, something of the real monarch remains. It's not legend, not portrait, but person. Where queens prayed for fertility, safety in childbirth, or forgiveness for ambitions too large to speak aloud, they cross themselves. They bow. The priest intones a blessing, and the courtiers exhale. Ritual complete. Day begun. Nobles gather with plans and petitions. But the king, freshly sanctified, walks quietly. He carries the scent of myrrh and the weight of his crown, invisible for now, yet already present. They exit the chapel slowly, heads high, steps measured. Behind them, candles still flicker. The incense still hangs in the air like a memory. Some monarchs found real joy in ritual. Queen Philippa of Hainault, wife to Edward III, was known for her deep compassion and piety. She was said to sing hymns to calm her children, to pray at the bedside of the sick, to walk barefoot in the snow during Lent. Her people adored her, believing her prayers alone could turn the tide of war or plague. It is easy to imagine one sitting alone here, long after Vespers, lit only by a single candle, wondering if the heavens heard them at all. Have you ever whispered into the dark and hoped someone was listening? Have mercy on me, O God. The acoustics of the chapel amplify the sound until it seems the very stone sings. The royal family processes in full regalia to the cathedral, preceded by bishops and followed by knights in polished mail. Within its pages, miniature saints offered comfort, angels fought off demons, and margins bloomed with golden vines. A queen might run her fingers over the images of the Annunciation, while waiting to hear news from a battlefield. A king might read the Psalms before sending a son into exile. These books were both shield and mirror. Do you carry a talisman like that, something that reminds you of order and chaos? The king wears a golden cope that drags behind him, its hem embroidered with tiny seraphim. The queen wears sapphires in her veil, each one sewn by hand. Before a congregation of nobles and commoners alike, they kneel together side by side beneath a canopy of red silk. The monarchs remain still, and for a moment, even the political tremors of the court seem to pause. Perhaps it is in these brief hymns that they find their truest selves, less as rulers, more as supplicants, or perhaps not. Perhaps it is merely tradition, repeated so long it feels like belief. After all, what monarch has not once whispered in the dark? Is anyone truly listening? He died of dysentery on a crusade, and was later named a saint. The archbishop lifts a gilded chalice, heavy with wine. Bells chime. Incense swirls. And as communion begins, a hush falls so deep, it seems the earth itself listens. These are the moments captured in tapestries and painted on chapel walls. The monarchs as divine vessels, sanctified by ritual. But what happens when the crown feels too heavy to bear? Other monarchs, less saintly perhaps, still understood the need for performance even in piety. A public kneel could prove loyalty to God and reinforce divine right in the eyes of watching courtiers. No jeweled rings, just hands folded, shoulders bowed. And within that posture lies the secret weight of the crown. To lead, one must kneel. What do you pray for when the fate of a kingdom hangs on your voice? This is no grand cathedral, though the beauty is still arresting. It is the private chapel, just off the royal apartments, reserved for sacred duties performed in stillness. Narrow benches line the sides. A crucifix, dark with age, rests on the altar. A book of ours lies open, its gilt pages worn from generations of pious fingers. The king kneels slowly now, velvet robes rustling against the rush-covered floor. The air holds a weight, like expectation, as if the room itself watches. Can you feel it too? That quiet pressure to be both ruler and servant? Devotions begin not with words but with breathing, slow, measured, and careful. The monarch murmurs Latin phrases half memorized, half sung. Domini exaudi orationem meum. Lord, hear my prayer. The priest, standing beside the altar, echoes the lines. The queen arrives next, flanked by her lady Zine. She kneels beside her husband. The two form a picture of serene unity, one that court artists will later paint in soft oils, though the truth beneath is rarely so peaceful. In this moment, though, all is still. The pages of the prayer book flutter as if by some invisible breath. Some rulers, like Louis IX of France, knelt so long and so often in prayer that his knees grew calloused. The people believed kings ruled by God's will, not birthright alone. The queen, too, must participate. Behind the altar, a choir begins a soft chant, their boyish voices rising like smoke. Miserere, me Deus. On high feast days, these moments of worship swell into spectacle. Candles are lit, hundreds of them casting a golden haze over the congregation. Not every monarch took comfort in this divine duty. The chapel, though small, holds the echoes of these fears. It is where kings admitted their limits. Devotion shaped every hour of royal life. Bells marked the canonical hours: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline. The book of ours was their constant companion, often elaborately illustrated and bound in velvet. Some were small enough to carry at all times, but not all devotion came from fear. Such queens blurred the line between saint and sovereign, and yet even they were bound by rules too rigid to escape. As the prayers end and the final chant fades into silence, the king and queen rise. Outside, the world brightens. The bells toll for terce. Court awaits. Ambassadors prepare their scrolls. And you, dear listener, can you see the lines between belief and performance? Shall we follow him now into the feasting hall, where silks rustle, laughter masks tension, and every bite may carry more than taste? A lone blacksmith labors at the edge of the palace kitchens, just beyond the reach of perfumed halls. His hammer rings faintly through the thick stone walls, a sound easily mistaken for distant thunder. Yet within the great feasting chamber, no one notices. They are too busy arranging gold-threaded tablecloths, adjusting silver goblets, and ensuring that the royal salt cellar, tall as a child and shaped like a miniature cathedral, is precisely centered. The air smells of roasting boar, cloves, baked pears, and the buttery richness of pastry crusts. Lanterns swing overhead, casting warm halos onto polished oak beams. A great feast is being prepared. Minstrels will pluck soft harmonies in the corners, while jesters tumble and joke in tones just safe enough not to offend. Yet behind the curtain of performance, tension simmers. Seating is a political statement. Peacocks roasted whole, their feathers reattached with pins, and their eyes replaced with glinting beads. The food is meant to impress, not nourish. Spices are more than flavor, they're symbols of wealth, imported at great cost from the East. To serve unseasoned meat would be an insult. And so the dishes arrive in waves, more elaborate with each round, more difficult to stomach. Some nobles nibble, others feign satisfaction, but the monarch must eat with conviction. All eyes are watching. Is that not its own kind of hunger? A blind harpist plays a haunting tune from a corner balcony. A falconer enters with a hooded bird and releases it to swoop above the guests' heads. Applause follows. Laughter blooms. She lifts her goblet only when expected, dabs her lips only when appropriate. A woman of the court once remarked that being queen meant learning to smile without meaning and to weep without tears. Yet behind that mask, the queen is calculating, watching which noble flatters most, who courts her attention, which alliances shift with each toast. For a moment, the mood lightens. Another noble older, sharper laughs a moment too loudly. The monarch notices, the steward notices. Everyone notices. Every gesture here is a message. And how often do messages go unread until it's far too late? Swans with gilded beaks, custards shaped like castles, steaming eels, twisted like ribbon. The crumb of pomegranate seed on the queen's cuff, the room inhales. Even the most jaded guests lean forward, sweetness at last. As the monarch lifts a silver knife and slices through the confection, a hush falls again. The room holds its breath. In that instant, no one speaks. Only the crack of sugar shell and the soft exhale of relief. The ritual is nearly done. The faint lipstick print on a goblet not her own. Everything matters. Everything speaks. Even the silence between courses. A glance exchanged across the table is red as scandal. Here, amid roast goose and song, reputations are made and unmade. Guests begin to stand, careful not to rise too quickly. Inside, the fires burn low. Servants begin to clear the dishes. The jester removes his mask. The harpist rests his fingers. The tension dissolves like steam, yet something lingers. Perhaps it's the knowledge that tomorrow it begins again. Another feast. Another performance. Another meal where meaning hides beneath the table. Bows are exchanged. Hands kissed. Compliments offered through veils of insincerity. The monarch departs first, leaving behind the echo of footsteps and the lingering scent of roasted cloves. Some historians say more wars began at banquets than on battlefields. Can joy survive when it is weaponized? The royal taster, a loyal servant chosen for their discretion, samples every dish before it touches royal lips. Others employed alchemists and astrologers to divine which dishes were safest on which days. Even water was suspect. Wine was the drink of choice, not only because it signaled prosperity, but because it dulled suspicion. Yet paranoia lingers in every swallow. How can you savor your meal when you suspect it might be your last? His face, though expressionless, is watched by everyone. One twitch, one pause, and the feast might end in panic. The smells are dizzying, sweet and savory, in equal parts, laced with nutmeg, vinegar, saffron, and rosewater. To be placed close to the king is favor. To be placed near the door is warning. But not just any feast, a ceremonial dinner to impress visiting nobles and reinforce the monarch's image as both generous host and divine ruler. To eat at a king's table was to taste power itself, but did the taste always match the cost? They are dressed in deep crimson velvet trimmed in ermine, jewels glint from their collar, and rings weight each hand. The queen follows, her gown trailing behind like spilled wine across the flagstones. Every movement is deliberate, every glance rehearsed. The guests will soon arrive, lords and ladies glittering in brocade, their voices raised in practiced laughter. A priest murmurs a blessing, and all heads bow, eyes fluttering shut. In that breath of silence, the weight of hierarchy presses down like a second ceiling. Even joy must wait for permission. What happens to hunger when it becomes a ritual? Servants know this well. They consult charts and whisper anxiously. platters are polished until they reflect torchlight like mirrors. The air is heavy with anticipation. For royalty, a feast is never merely a meal, it's strategy, diplomacy, theater. Have you ever dined while wondering if your companion was also your enemy? When the monarch finally enters, the room stills. Not because of fear, but because of gravity. They take their places at the high table, raised slightly above the others. Bread is broken and wine poured, but not yet drunk. The first course is brought and prated, really by a line of liveried servers. Guests murmur in delight, though few truly enjoy the taste. Not everything on the table is safe. Poison is a constant fear, silent, scentless, and politically convenient. Some rulers refuse certain foods entirely. To distract from such thoughts, entertainment fills the space between courses. Dwarfs in silver masks perform acrobatics on the hearthstones, but watch the courtiers closely. Even as they clap, they lean slightly toward one another. Whispers travel like invisible ribbons. A noble's late arrival sparks speculation. Queen smiles, gracious and unreadable. One guest, a young duke with unruly hair, stumbles slightly after his fourth glass. A ripple of discomfort follows. Later, servants remove the dishes, carefully, reverently. What remains is not just scraps, but stories. The untouched venison beside a bishop's plate. The final dish arrives, marchpane shaped like a castle, with sugared flags and icing battlements. The feast ends with a blessing, the clink of cups, and the sigh of release. Outside the hall, the night is cold and vast. And you, dear listener, have you ever sat at a table where everything tasted wrong, even when it looked right? Hope stirs quietly in the royal nursery, though the corridors outside remain dim and hushed. A faint scent of lavender hangs in the air, clinging to the swaddling cloths and carved wooden cradles. The fire in the hearth burns low, just enough to take the chill from the stone floor. In the rocking chair, a nursemaid dozes upright, her head nodding gently as she clutches a knitted blanket. A single candle flickers near the small bed where the youngest heir sleeps tiny. It's fragile, and already a symbol far heavier than his weight. Royal children are not born into ordinary childhoods. They are not cooed over in marketplaces or swung in the arms of fathers after supper. Another insists that a princess must learn to embroider perfectly, for her needle will carry messages long before her mouth may speak. Not because he is cruel or disinterested, but because to stumble in the mud, to scrape a knee. To laugh unguardedly, these are luxuries he cannot afford. The doll wears a gown stitched in the colors of a powerful house. A prince is gifted a hunting falcon, not for companionship, but to begin the rituals of masculinity. These gifts are not playthings, they are training. Warnings, even. The daughter adored in private but dismissed in policy. Their lives are carefully sculpted not by desire, but by placement. A girl may be betrothed before she loses her baby teeth. A boy may be sent to foster with a distant noble, learning not only chivalry, but the taste of being unwanted. What kind of childhood forms when every gesture is loaded with meaning? Another. That a princess, only 12, negotiated her dowry terms with a visiting envoy. Childhood, in this world, is not a time of growth, but of shaping. And what happens to the soul when it's carved before it ever learns to breathe? Every moment of his life is preparation. For a throne, for scrutiny, for war, perhaps. His toys are swords and maps. His dreams are not his own. Young Quintaby who climbs trees in her gown and ruins the stitching. A prince who hides under the table during a banquet, refusing to speak. Firelight fades. The nursemaid hums under her breath. Outside, owls call from the tower roof. The child stirs in his sleep, turning gently toward the sound. For a moment, all burdens fade. Here in this breath, he is not heir or pawn or hope embodied. He is simply a sleeping child. And in that stillness, something sacred lingers. These acts, small to us, loom large in a court that fears unpredictability, or of laughing without consequence, or of being held not because it was duty, but because it was love. The chamber staff whisper about it for days. The monarchs scold with sighs and narrowed eyes. Tutors double the lessons. But somewhere within those young hearts, a protest stirs. Have you ever been taught lessons meant not for understanding, but for surviving? They recognize the cold shifts in tone. They read faces like books, long before they can read words. One child, standing beside his father on the palace balcony, watches the crowd cheer and senses the hollowness in his father's smile. He says nothing, but he sees. And what is childhood if not the first quiet witness? Instead, their every yawn, cry, and fever is recorded in ledgers, discussed in chambers, and whispered about in council. Here, among carved toys and painted saints, the royal children learn their first words and take their first steps, though rarely into their parents' arms. Kings and queens are too busy with the machinery of rule, and besides, affection shown too openly might seem improper. A nursemaid singing lullabies in a forgotten dialect from her village. A governess who sneaks honeyed almonds beneath a blanket during Lent. The gentle snoring of a sibling in the adjacent bedchamber. Laughter muffled into a pillow after lights are extinguished. These moments do not make the histories, but they live in memory. Even kings once clutched a favorite blanket. Even queens once wept when their cat died. The children are instead tended by a rotating cast of wet nurses, governesses, tutors. Fevers are feared more than armies. A rash may trigger panic. If an heir dies young, succession crises erupt, wars ignite, and so the physicians come armed with syrups, poultices, leeches. Sometimes their cures do more harm than good. One child, pale and coughing, is wrapped in boiled onions and ash, per doctor's advice. Another is denied water during a fever, under the belief it might dilute the humors. Isn't it strange how little knowledge once stood between a child's breath and a kingdom's future? And chamberwomen, many of whom grow more attached to the child than the monarchs themselves. This child, no more than a breath in a dream, carries the burden of succession. The kingdom watches. A prince too close to his mother might be seen as weak. A daughter too adored might become a pawn too precious to trade. And so love was often filtered through ritual. A pat on the head in public, a gift left anonymously on a feast day. Do you remember being loved quietly from a distance? And what happens when a cradle carries the weight of a crown? It's the use of fork and knife, the correct posture during a procession, how to enter a room, how to exit it. Each movement must be memorized, drilled, repeated until instinct. One boy was once punished for smiling with his teeth at a visiting ambassador. Another for calling a servant by name. Innocence in royal children had a very short life. The nursery is both sanctuary and surveillance post. This detachment was by design. Affection in royal families could become a liability. By the age of 5, a royal child's world shifts dramatically. Formal lessons begin. Latin, first always Latin, then scripture, then history, heraldry, court etiquette. The tutors are relentless. 1. A gray-bearded scholar who smells of dust and ink raps a ruler softly against the desk when a prince falters over conjugation. Outside, common children run barefoot in the courtyard, chasing chickens and laughing in the dust. But the prince watches from behind a latticed window, cannot join. Even play is politicized. A princess receives a doll from a visiting duchess not to amuse, but to signal alliance. There is joy sometimes, brief, flickering, but real. Still, the stakes are always near. A royal child's health is tracked obsessively. Some children are never allowed to be children at all. The spare sibling, raised to obey. The illegitimate son acknowledged, but never embraced. One historian wrote that a certain prince began signing royal decrees at age 7. Still, there are flickers of rebellion. Royal children know more than they're told. They hear whispers through doors. At night, the nursery dims once more. We do not remember their dreams, these royal children. But perhaps they dreamed of running through meadows without shoes. And you, dear listener, have you ever looked back on your own childhood and wondered which parts were yours and which were made for someone else? The lantern's glow softens as you step through a quieter corridor. Past the nursery where lullabies have faded and into a smaller chamber wrapped in velvet and hush. No fanfare sounds here. No loud footsteps echo, but make no mistake, this is a place of immense power. The queen sits by the window, her silhouette outlined against the dusky light. She is not merely exchanging pleasantries with her cousin in another court. She is sending signals testing alliances, making suggestions that cannot be traced back to her, laying groundwork for influence that will bloom months or even years later. Every sentence is crafted like lace, delicate, beautiful, and impossible to unravel without destroying the whole. The patterns she chose, the colors she favored, even the thread knots told a coded story who was favored. Who was not, what grievance she could not voice aloud. Her tapestries were more than art. They were policy. Is it any wonder that some historians now study sewing patterns like state archives? In her hands, a piece of embroidery lies half-finished, delicate thread curling through linen like ivy. She does not look up, she listens. Protect your children without seeming too possessive, and smile always. Smile must never falter. Even when rumors begin to stir about her fertility, her loyalties, her lineage, she must remain composed. Her jewelry will be discussed, her laugh analyzed, her silence interpreted. She knows which guests to flatter, which to ignore. A glance toward a visiting earl might mend a diplomatic rift, a child exiled for politics, a brother disgraced. The queen bears them all without visible sorrow. To mourn publicly is to show weakness. She writes letters instead stacked beneath her writing desk like dried petals from a garden she is no longer allowed to tend. Sometimes she rereads them by candlelight. Sometimes she burns them. The crown may rest on the king's brow, but here tonight it rests invisibly on hers. A crown of thoughts, of plans, of burdens carried in silence. A turned shoulder might start a feud. She performs, not for applause, but for survival. When the court forgets her influence, she reminds them subtly. Through the favoring of one noble family over another, through a donation to a local convent, through an offhand remark that shifts an entire council's direction. The queen rises, her embroidery folded and placed carefully on a side table. The war resumes tomorrow, quiet, unending, and invisible to those who do not know where to look. She does not raise her voice. She does not need to. The room bends slightly whenever she enters. Not everyone sees it, but she does, and maybe you do too. To cry would be weakness. To protest, arrogance, so she smiles. They too are players in this game, watchers and whisperers, loyal and fearful. One will carry her fan. A third will brush out her hair at night and listen as she speaks in hushed tones about what was said and what was left unsaid. Even queens need someone to speak to when the mask is too heavy. A raised eyebrow at council, a subtle gift to a rival's child, carefully timed illness to avoid attending a dangerous meeting. Power, for women in the court, was not seized, but seeded, planted in soil often barren. Nurtured over years with no guarantee of bloom.
What kind of strength does it take to keep growing in such dim light?
Somewhere beyond the walls, men are deciding the future, and in this room so is she.
She notes whose names are spoken more often. She gathers information not through orders, but through conversation maids, brushing her hair. Stewards delivering wine, distant cousins sharing idle gossip. Catherine de' Medici ruled France as regent, navigating brutal religious wars with terrifying grace. Eleanor of Aquitaine rode into battle in armor, defying the expectations of two kings. These women did not wait for power to be handed to them. They reached for it quietly, cleverly, and sometimes ruthlessly. Each word is weighed, filed, considered. Every fragment matters. Have you ever had to build your truth from other people's secrets? The Queen's quiet war is one of silence, smiles, and strategy. Unlike the battlefield, it leaves no blood, but its wounds are just as deep. She was trained for this long before she was crowned, not with swords or sermons, but with glances, gestures, and the careful study of how power moves. Her weapons are words, armor, etiquette, where victories are rarely celebrated because no one is supposed to know she's fighting at all. How does one win a war where the rules are never spoken? It begins with the letter she is writing. Her quill scratches softly across parchment, the ink flowing steady and deliberate. These letters will pass through trusted hands, disguised beneath seals and symbols. Some may never arrive. Others may arrive with small additions, edits made by the men who intercept and inspect. She knows this. Others are married late, brought in to secure bloodlines rather than share governance. And some rare, dangerous, are born with minds too sharp to soften. These women quickly learn to navigate a world that praises their beauty and fears their intelligence. She writes with layers, double meanings folded between pleasantries. If power is denied to her openly, she will claim it in whispers. Have you ever had to speak volumes in silence? Not every queen is allowed this subtle strength. Some are married young, shipped off like expensive gifts to foreign courts. One such queen, long ago, was said to wield her influence through embroidery. In the court, her presence is expected, but her voice is not always welcome. She must walk beside the king without outshining him. Advise him. Without appearing to command. Behind that smile, thoughts churn. She watches who visits the king and when. Some queens do more than watch, they act. Isabella of France, wife to Edward II, conspired to overthrow her husband after years of public humiliation and political exclusion. But not every queen could afford such boldness, for most influence required patience. Tonight, the queen will attend a feast. She will sit beside her husband, draped in cloth gold and framed in candlelight. Behind her, her ladies-in-waiting hover like shadows, alert to every change in expression. There are losses too, friendships sacrificed, dreams quieted, and yet she endures. Outside, the sky darkens fully. The last of the light slips from the stained glass, and the windows become mirrors reflecting the room back upon itself. As she walks from the chamber, the candlelight trails behind her like memory. Her steps are slow, deliberate, graceful. And you, dear listener, have you ever fought a battle no one could see, and won without anyone ever knowing? A lone blacksmith labors at dawn, far from the velvet chambers and candlelit strategy of the royal apartments. His forge glows like a captured sun, embers pulsing with the beat of his hammer. Each strike sends sparks dancing into the chilly air, briefly lighting the faces of two men nearby, silent, watching, cloaked in royal colors. They are not here for horseshoes or hinges. They're here for something smaller, quieter, and far more dangerous. A dagger made for a prince. This is not the work of court artists or robed scholars. It is the world beneath the skeleton of the palace. It's blacksmiths, scribes, cooks, messengers. The quiet laborers who keep the kingdom upright while the royals debate and dine. One misheard phrase, one note glimpsed from a pocket, and the steward knows more than he should. But he has learned over decades to say little and remember everything. But he writes one extra line hidden between the flourishes, tucked inside a word's curve signal to another scribe at another court. They dance, they laugh, they wear bells on their caps. But in a court where truth is punished, only the fool may speak freely. A joke about taxes, they speak in glances. They trade information like thread, weaving unseen alliances. Page sent to a monastery. The palace absorbs these disappearances like a stone absorbs rain quietly, without protest. And yet others remain learning the lesson. But some do notice. A clever queen, a weary ambassador. A child, perhaps, not yet taught to ignore. A guest uninvited is not grand. It is not sung in halls, but it is real. Sometimes it saves lives. They understand that beneath every throne is a network of hands, eyes, and ears. They tip a coin, share a kind word, or listen just once when a servant stutters a warning, watching even more closely, knowing which secrets are safe to keep and which must be passed like hot coals before they burn. A washerwoman who scrubs blood from a noble's shirt. A cook who prepares a last-minute fast-day meal for a visiting bishop. Her tray is lighter now. The spice is delivered. Her back aches. Her fingers are raw. But she smiles slightly. The court sleeps. But beneath it, the whispering walls breathe. They have always breathed. She has overheard nothing urgent, not yet but interesting. She tucks it away in memory, like a seed waiting for rain. She hums softly and disappears into the stone shadows. A stable boy who sees which carriage leaves at midnight? None of them write history, but history bends toward them again and again. What have you remembered? Not because it was important to them, but because it was important to you. It's a song about the bishop's new boots. Everyone laughs, but some laughter is hollow. The jester watches closely. He knows which lords can be mocked and which cannot. He reads faces not just for approval, but for fear. He will not be paid for it. But to him, this is the true work of the quill. Did you know that rebellion can hide in the loops of a pen stroke? What is memory, after all, if not a ledger of unseen truths? Here in the shadow of the throne, power looks different. He does it in rhyme. He cloaks it in absurdity, but it lands. A king once banished a jester for a pun that struck too close. Another promoted one for mocking a dangerous rival. In this strange, inverted world, the truth may travel best in motley. Have you ever disguised your honesty in a joke, just to make it bearable? His fingers are stained with ink and beeswax. His task is simple and endless. Copy letters, draft proclamations, transcribe treaties. But tonight, he hesitates. The letter he is copying is not for general eyes. It is from the Queen, and it bears a name that disappeared from court 3 months ago. He wonders quietly if the name will reappear soon, or if it has been erased in ink only. But because she listens, that is her strength. It is said that queens rule the rooms, kings rule the lands, but servants rule the walls. Have you ever known a place so well you could walk it with your eyes closed? It wears soot. It smells of oil and ash, and it moves not in proclamations, but in whispers. He checks barrels, weighs sacks of grain, smells the salted meats for signs of spoil. The court will eat peacock and pastry, yes, but only if he has managed the math behind the curtain. A miscount of eggs can trigger a noble's insult. A rotten fish may send a bishop into dangerous suspicion. He balances this all while being invisible. How much of history do you think was written not with words but with tools? Elsewhere in the still damp stone corridor between the kitchens and the treasury, a servant girl carries a tray of spices wrapped in linen. Her feet are bare quieter, that way and her steps are practiced, avoiding the creaky flagstone third from the end. She knows the rhythms of this place better than any noble. She knows who meets in which corridor after dark, which chamber door never locks, which messages are slipped beneath which tapestries. And she says nothing. Not out of fear, though fear is never far. Not far from her, the steward reviews the day's meal inventory, and invisibility is dangerous in its own way. It gives you access. It makes people careless around you. In a turret chamber lined with fading maps, a royal scribe sharpens his quill. He copies the letter anyway. That is his job. Even the jesters hold power. Sometimes the jester speaks truth no one else dares to say. These people, the invisible, the necessary, make up the whispering walls of the court. Sometimes they vanish. Too much knowledge, poorly hidden. Too much curiosity mistaken for loyalty. A steward replaced for his health, and the nobles. They rarely notice. They walk past these quiet figures as if past paintings on a wall. That one moment of listening can change everything. A plot foiled, letter intercepted. Can you recall a time someone helped you quietly, without asking, without thanks? In a dim hallway near the chapel, the servant girl from earlier stops to rest. The blacksmith wipes his brow. The scribe stretches his fingers. The steward locks the wine cellar. And you, dear listener, what have you seen that others did not? At twilight's edge, as the final rays of sunlight strain through stained glass and flicker across polished stone, the court gathers once more, not for worship or feasting, but for something older than both. Spectacle, ceremony, pageantry. This is not the flash of war, nor the hush of prayer, but a different kind of ritual altogether. The procession begins just beyond the west wing of the palace, where the long corridor glows with torches spaced like stars. The king stands still, flanked by pages who hold the hem of his robe. It is so heavy with gold thread, it drags like a curtain behind him. He wears a crown tonight, not the one used for coronations, but one lighter, though no less pointed. Beneath it, his brow glistens. Courtiers approach with carefully memorized lines. Entertainers, perform musicians, poets, dancers, all vetted days in advance. None allowed to fail. But failure, of course, is relative. One missed note, one stumble in the dance, and a performer might be dismissed forever. He bows deeply, and when he plays, the room softens. Perhaps he will be summoned again, or perhaps he has already served his purpose. A note in a ledger, a favor returned. The music floats, light and aching, like mist over a meadow. Even the most rigid noble leans in, caught off guard by the purity of it. The queen closes her eyes. The king does not, but his jaw relaxes slightly. For a moment, they are not monarchs, but simply people, listening. A yawn may doom her to obscurity. She knows this. She has practiced this moment for weeks. An aging duke, dozing behind his goblet. Bishop shifting in discomfort, his robes too tight, his pride too fragile. A foreign emissary scribbling notes with a gloved hand. They perform too, in their way each a player in this unspoken game. Perhaps years. The audience sees a girl performing poetry. She knows she's gambling a future. Have you ever bet everything on being noticed? His hands, hidden in velvet gloves, twitch with the weight of what is expected. He must not cough. He must not stumble. He must not look tired. Their robes are adjusted by silent attendants. Their steps retrace through the torchlit corridor. The nobles bow once more. The musicians play a final chord. The gallery empties in a rustle of silk and murmurs. He sketches in charcoal from a dark corner, recording the arrangement of bodies, the shapes of robes, the posture of the queen. The air, now filled with smoke and perfume, settles. Servants begin their cleanup, rolling up carpets, folding tapestries, polishing silver. The glory fades quickly. But for a few hours, it held everyone, bent them into shape, reminded them who they were allowed to be. His drawings will later become oil portraits, idealized, cleaned of exhaustion, full of symmetry. The truth of the night will be smoothed into art. History will remember the light, not the weight. For in the eyes of the watching court, he is not just man, he is symbol. And what happens when symbols begin to tremble? Bows, though not too low. His eyes do not meet the king's. This is expected, to wear it as an honor, but also a warning. The court now watches him more closely. Favor is light to lift, but heavy to carry. What do you do when the crown turns toward you? To meet the monarch's gaze without invitation is boldness. To avoid it completely is insult. Balance is everything. The queen walks beside him, her gown shimmering like moonlit water, her smile fixed but soft. Her sleeves trail behind like wings, embroidered with scenes of conquest and mercy. Her voice is clear, though her hands tremble. She wears a garland of dried roses, and each line she speaks is a test. The queen listens with an expression of mild interest. The king leans his head, as if pondering theology. In truth, both are judging not just her poetry, but her poise, her clothing, her worth. Tapestries hang from the rafters, depicting saints, battles, and legends, but also subtly. Victories of the current monarch's bloodline. The walls tell stories. The floor demands silence. And the room holds its breath. Not for minutes, but for hours. Their expressions must suggest serenity, wisdom, and mild interest, even, as their feet go numb and their backs ache beneath layers of velvet. Pageantry is its own kind of battle. Stillness becomes discipline. Single frown may spark rumors of illness. To misjudged smile may be mistaken for treasonous favor. Every thread has meaning. Every jewel is placed for impact. Behind them, nobles follow in 2 columns, each ordered by rank and favor, their faces carefully composed.
Ow.
To be placed too far back is humiliation. Too far forward, and one risks unwanted attention. The procession winds toward the great gallery, where hundreds await. Some stand. Others sit on cushioned benches, arranged like petals around a central aisle. Have you ever felt your own footsteps echo louder than your thoughts? Once seated upon their thrones, the royal pair must remain still. Their roles tonight are simple, to be seen. This is what power often looks like, not action but presence. Their eyes move slowly across the hall. Who decides what is worth remembering and what must be erased? Among the performers tonight is a child prodigy, a violinist, no older than 10, brought from a distant duchy as a gesture of allegiance. Then the song ends, and the moment vanishes like breath on glass. Applause swells. The boy bows again. He will be remembered briefly. What happens to brilliance when it becomes background? As the evening deepens, the rituals become stranger. A knight is publicly awarded a Tokana ribbon, pinned to his doublet symbolizing royal gratitude for his service in a border dispute. The ribbon is made of silk, dyed in imported indigor, then gold, more precious than salt. Later still, the ceremony shifts again. A young noblewoman performs a recitation verses from a saint's vision, translated into courtly verse. A smile from the monarch may secure her a marriage. Beyond the formalities, there are those who endure the pageantry only because they must. And watching them all is the court painter. Isn't that how most stories are told? As the ceremony draws to its slow conclusion, the monarchs rise. Behind them, the hall grows quiet. The torches are extinguished. And you, dear listener, have you ever worn a costume so long you forgot how it felt to be bare? Hope stirs quietly in the Queen's chamber as a storm gathers beyond the shutters. The fire crackles softly, and candlelight dances over the edges of a writing desk scattered with dried petals, unfinished letters, and a locket that hasn't been opened in years. There's a chill tonight, not from weather alone, but from something quieter, something more lingering. But in a side chamber, near the Queen's apartments, a nurse rocks a young boy to sleep. He is not yet a prince, not officially, not publicly, but he carries royal blood, and in this world that changes everything. He was born of scandal, some say, others say of survival. His presence is both secret and open secret, acknowledged by glances, never by decree. But her reflection now looks more like a historian's question than an answer. How do you measure a life built in the margins of someone else's legacy? The court has quieted after a long day of ceremony, and the Queen, now unadorned, sits with a letter from her daughter. They laugh quietly, though their hands tremble from age and cold. The jester tells stories, not loud ones anymore, but whispered, slow, remembered. No matter, there is always another storm, another delay. The Queen nods, dismisses her gently. Alone again, she reaches for her embroidery. The pattern is a hawk in mid-dive, its wings sharp and full of tension. She continues her work in silence. He recalls a queen who danced barefoot in a forbidden chamber, a prince who cried when his bird died. The palace walls carry all of it. Scratches, she sets it aside and opens the locket once more. Tonight, she will sleep alone by custom, not by punishment. The king, distant in his own chambers, is not cruel, but their lives long ago became parallel lines. They run beside each other, touching only at state events and carefully choreographed gestures. Still, they were once in love, or something like it. She remembers a moment, just one of laughter in a sunlit garden. It was real, brief, but real. It echoes, the canopy high above her like the roof of a cathedral. The fire dies slowly. The wind murmurs through the shutters, and in the stillness, she allows herself something rare, to miss the people she used to be. Forgotten footsteps. Everything leaves a trace. A bishop who once admitted to fear before a council, a princess, now grown, married far away, beyond seas and alliances. They are the warmth that lives in memory's shadow. Sometimes the shadow is the truest part. He lines them up on the floor, murmuring names, giving each a story. The boar is brave. The rabbit is clever. The horse can fly. A servant watches from the doorway and smiles. The nurse in the side chamber falls asleep in her chair, the child curled against her chest. The jester finishes his last game, humming a tune no one else remembers. A maid folds linen she herself will never sleep in. Queen dreams of nothing, or perhaps everything. The scent of rain lingers. The hawk in her embroidery dives forever, stitched into stillness. She remembers when the princess used to sit in that same spot. The palace exhales, not loudly, not noticeably, just enough to remind itself it is alive. She remembers when the Queen was younger, faster to laugh. Her words, inked in an uneven hand, carry warmth but also distance. Not to study her reflection, but to see what the world sees. The lines at the corner of her eyes, the gray in her temples, the expression that has, over the years, become her mask. She does not flinch. She adjusts nothing. This is not vanity. In royal life, separation is constant. Children are raised to leave. Husbands are chosen to rule. Friends become pawns. And yet, amid all that motion, there is still something that persists: love. Yes, but also memory. The Queen touches the locket, its hinge delicate with age. Inside is a miniature painting, faded but still tender. A girl no older than 5, laughing in a garden long raised for a new wing of the palace. What happens when your fondest memories no longer have a place to return to? Outside the chamber, the halls are quiet. Most of the court sleeps. The nurse hums an old lullaby as she rocks him, one her mother sang to her when she was no older than the child in her arms. The boy stirs, eyes fluttering open, then closed again. He will never know this moment, but it will live inside him. The scent curls around her. Clove, cinnamon, something floral. It soothes the edge of the chill. She walks to the window and opens it a sliver. Rain begins to fall, soft and steady. She listens. There is no audience here. No performance. It's just a woman, standing in a gown she did not choose, in a room filled with things she cannot take with her. These quiet acts of care, of warmth, leave echoes.
No.
Do you remember something kind you were too young to understand? The queen, meanwhile, folds the letter gently, places it in a carved box, and rises to pour herself a cup of warm spiced wine. She once believed she would be powerful. And in many ways, she is. Somewhere in the bowels of the castle, an old jester, long retired, plays cards with a servant in the kitchen. None of these stories are recorded. They will not make the chronicles. But they are true. What do we lose when we forget the stories no one bothered to write down? Back in her chamber, the queen seats herself before a mirror. A knock at the door, a maid with the news that the storm has delayed a caravan. Have you ever created something beautiful only to wonder who, if anyone, will see it? Meanwhile, in a forgotten hallway, a young boy plays with carved wooden animals left by a cousin now long married. Time folds in on itself here. The past is never far. The child becomes the parent, becomes the portrait. Do the walls remember you if you've lived long enough inside them? Later, the queen's embroidery is finished. She slips into bed. Who were you before the world taught you to wear armor? The night deepens, and all around them. And you, dear listener, what small tenderness have you stitched into your own story, quietly, for no one else to see? The lantern's glow softens as it swings gently in the chapel's outer cloister. Here, where stone columns rise like tree trunks and ivy weaves quietly through the arches, the king walks alone. The king takes it in hand. His crown is gone, his gloves removed. His hands, so often shielded from the world by silk and ceremony, are bare and cold and more human than most will ever see. This pilgrimage will not last days or weeks. It may last only hours, but it is a journey all the same, one made not across fields, but within. He says, only speak what burdens you. And for a moment, the king says nothing. What burdens him is not one act, but 1,000 small silences, decisions made too late, words said too sharply. He lists no names, but each phrase carries weight, speaks of anger, of pride, of vanity, of silence, of how often he wanted to say, I'm sorry, and didn't. The monk listens. He does not interrupt. Outside, the wind rises against the chapel walls. It sounds almost like a whisper, or a warning, or a lullaby. A son who does not speak to him, a village he never visited, now gone. A treaty signed with a hand that trembled. And here the king is not judged by courts or books, but by whatever listens in the quiet. Some say that in this silence kings hear God. Others say they simply hear themselves. He wonders if she would have forgiven him, not as queen, but as the girl who knew him before he wore crowns. A priest pens a reflection for the chapel's morning mass. He writes of humility, of the dangers of pride. He does not know the king has just walked the cloisters, knelt in the dark, and wept. But he will speak of mercy nonetheless. The words will drift through the chapel like incense, clinging to robes, to banners, to stone. The king may hear them. The servants do not speak. They simply light the fire, draw the curtains, and leave him to undress in silence. He stares at his reflection in the wash basin. His face is older than he remembers, his eyes softer, or he may not. But they will be spoken all the same. Just a moment of human touch, a reminder that even sovereigns bleed. The king stands slowly. His knees ache. His palms are reddened. Tonight, for just 1 hour, he was not a symbol. He was a soul. But there is a kind of stillness in his breath now. Not peace, perhaps, but something nearby. Have you ever traveled without leaving the place you stood but for relief? His cloak rustles against the cold floor, and his boots echo in the hush. No trumpets accompany him now. No courtiers follow. The chapel bells do not ring for him tonight. He walks in silence, past alcoves where saints peer down in carved stillness, past doorways that lead to nothing but shadows, stars. He imagines what it would be like to walk through the world unnoticed, to speak without consequence, to err without consequence. But he is king. Kings do not live in dreams. The air bites against his skin. He does not return to the palace immediately. Steady walks the outer wall, where ivy clings like memory and moss thickens between stones. Above him, the branches move gently, as if nodding. This garden was planted by a queen long dead. Her name is etched into a marble plaque near the fountain. He loved her once, not the queen, but the girl she was before. The girl who sang off key. The girl who once stole a pastry from the kitchen and gave it to a hungry page. Here, where guards once stood with torches, only the moon watches now. Its light spills across the courtyard like spilled milk, soft and indifferent. One queen, accused of pride, slept on stone for 7 nights and ate only roots and river water. Pain, they believed, purified, and to suffer was to be seen. What does it mean when guilt becomes performance? This is where monarchs come to speak to their god, not in public, not in pageantry, but in raw, unadorned solitude. Beyond it lies the chamber of relics, bones of saints, fragments of cloth, a chipped cup once claimed to be holy. He enters slowly, head bowed. A monk waits within, silent robes the color of fog. He gestures to a low stool before an altar. The king kneels not like a ruler, but like a man. Just the soft creak of old hinges, the faint hiss of wind, and the memory of something heavy within his chest. Tonight is not for spectacle. Tonight is for penance. A wooden staff leans against the doorway, its top worn smooth by years of fingers grasping it with trembling conviction. He steps into the cloister walk, where candles line the path like fallen stars. Once, long ago, kings walked barefoot in the snow as penance. Some carried crosses on their backs. Others fasted until their bones showed through their skin. The king stops before a worn wooden door. This monk does not ask for titles, does not use honorifics. Can power confess to itself? I have sinned in thought, word, and deed. The king begins, voice low, barely more than breath. Confession in this chamber is not recorded. It is not passed to advisors. It is a burial ground for regret. Which voice would you fear more? When it is done, the monk places a hand on the king's shoulder. No blessing, no absolution. He exits the chamber and walks into the open night. Can forgiveness live in silence? In the far cloister garden, a stone bench waits beneath a weeping willow. The king sits. He closes his eyes. The smell of wet grass, of lavender, of old stone, all of it carries her memory. Hey, have you ever missed someone not for what they gave you, but for who they let you be? Elsewhere in the castle, perhaps that is the point. Confession is not transaction, it is offering. It's not for reward. Can you let go of something, even if no one sees you do it? The king returns to his chamber in the early hours before dawn. His robes are damp, his boots muddy. He lies down on his bed, but sleep does not come immediately. He stares at the carved canopy above angels, vines still, and you, dear listener, have you ever forgiven yourself? Not because the world told you to, but because you finally could. A lone blacksmith labors in the early gray of morning, but this time, not at the forge. Past halls no longer walked, and rooms left to dust, lies the chamber of a queen no longer permitted to rule. She is not forgotten, but she is set aside, politely, permanently, counting each step like beads on a rosary. She recites poetry to herself, but by then, it was already done. The corridors were colder. Her name was used less often. Rooms moved farther from the court. Now only the queen remains. She's allowed books. A garden window box with herbs she tends herself. Occasionally a musician is sent up to play for her, though none stay long. She asks too many questions. Quests songs no longer in fashion. The young players don't know the old tunes, the old ones well. They rarely accept the invitation. When a servant slips her an orange from the kitchens, when the sun lands just right on her desk, when she dreams of walking barefoot on grass, that memory comes back, often green earth, a soft breeze, the feeling of being unseen and free. A small thing, but hers. To refuse to forget herself, even as the world quietly asks her to. Her advice, once sought after, suddenly seemed out of touch. The sound echoes up the staircase, metal clanging against stone, bolts sliding into place. The queen hears it. She sets down her quill and waits. The servant delivering her breakfast tray avoids her eyes. The queen smiles anyway. But in the tower, something different lives in stillness. clarity, a flame that refuses to be snuffed. And in that silence, a question floats upward like smoke. She has learned not to take it personally. And then, one day she was told she needed rest. Quiet place. Peace. That word peace has never sounded so much like a knife. She sings lullabies remembered from childhood, wrought with a delicate pattern of vines, an illusion of grace over steel. She nods to it as if it were another guest in her long, strange vigil. Then she returns to her writing, that she cursed the crown with a glance. The stories grow with each retelling, but madness is a label often used to cover discomfort. It's easier to say she's broken than to admit she was buried alive. And sometimes, the bells below still toll the hours, but she no longer counts them. She marks time by the way the ivy crawls across the tower bricks, the way the sparrows nest and return, the way her own hair grays strand by strand. She speaks aloud not to the servants who do not answer, nor to herself exactly, but to memory. Not out of delusion, but defiance. She writes to her children, though they are grown. She asks about the state of the orchards, about the harvest festivals, about a song her daughter used to hum. Letters are placed in a sealed chest. She knows they may never leave the tower. But writing them allows her to remember herself, not the image. Not the rumor, but the woman who once held nations in her gaze, to the echoes of who she was. Have you ever tried to keep something alive just by speaking it? They call it a retreat, a retirement, a cloister of contemplation. But she knows, as do those who walk her meals up steep stone steps twice daily, that it is exile by another name. What is a prison when the door is draped in silk? He is hammering iron bars into shape, etched in gold above altars. She once hosted ambassadors in marble halls, danced in embroidered slippers, spoke 5 languages and 3 dialects of diplomacy. And now she writes letters no one responds to. Her windows are barred, her mirrors taken away, her gowns replaced with simpler dresses in muted colors. Yet she still arranges her hair each morning, still says her prayers, still signs her name with the elegance of old ceremony. Not for tools or horseshoes, but for a door. Some are unmade. This one fell not in disgrace, but in disuse. Her influence waned when she failed to produce another son, or when she advised too boldly, or when her husband's gaze began to drift. The reason changes depending on who is telling it. Some say she knew too much. Others say she knew too little. The truth lies somewhere between, as it so often does. It's thick, gritted, unyielding. The kind that closes with a finality you can feel in your teeth. This door will be. Mounted in the high tower, the one with only one narrow window and a stairwell so steep, the steps disappear into darkness. It is not for protection, it is for confinement. In the castle's upper reaches, her name is carved on the walls below. She walks the tower's single corridor daily. Not all queens are crowned. She had warning, a servant's warning glance, a letter left unsigned, a missing seal on a usual decree. The high tower was built generations ago, supposedly for astronomy, a place to study the stars. The telescope rusted long ago. Still, she listens, she reads, she waits. She has made peace with waiting. Time passes differently here. What do you measure time by when no one is measuring you? Some believe she is mad, that she talks to ghosts, that she once saw a vision of the Virgin in the candle smoke, and yet she smiles sometimes. Have you ever clung to a moment so small it kept you alive? In her letters still written, though never answered, she continues to sign as queen. Perhaps that is the most radical thing she can do. To remember. Have you ever refused to vanish, even when the room forgot you? One morning, the blacksmith's iron door is installed. The door is beautiful in its own way. Outside, the court continues. Banners flutter, dances are held, decisions made. What happens when a queen is no longer seen, but still remains? And you, dear listener, what part of you still lingers, waiting to be named again? At twilight's edge, beneath a sky bruised with violet and deepening dusk, the royal court gathers in the rose garden. A hush has settled over the hedges. Music plays faintly, just a lute and a reed pipe, lilting and soft. A pavilion has been set up with silken drapes and golden cushions. Looks festive, almost joyful. But this is not a celebration. She is 16, or maybe 17. She's already forgotten what number the court prefers her to be. She has never met him. His portrait hangs in the East Gallery, a handsome man, older, with a face full of duty and fatigue. She studies it sometimes, not to fall in love, but to prepare, to make real what has so far only existed in whispers and letters. Around her swirl the noble women she grew up with, some jealous, some genuinely sad, some already replacing her in their thoughts. Her trunk is filled with silks and letters, but it is the invisible things that she clings to. A pressed flower, ring too small for her finger now, a scrap of music folded in a hidden pocket. The things that are truly hers. A bishop offers a blessing, long and droning, his fingers cold on her brow. Perfectly, graciously. She says the right words in the right tone, the right tilt of her head. She is, in this moment, exactly what she was trained to be. A symbol, a promise, a bridge between two realms. But inside, something aches, not with fear, but with the soft sadness of inevitability. But because to look back would be to unravel. Her hand tightens on the small locket in her lap, her mother's face inside. The scent of roses still on her skin. The king gives her a goblet to toast. She lifts it with steady hands. Round her eyes glisten. Not all the tears are real. Awake. Thinking. She goes over the names of her new household, the customs she must remember, the language she must perfect. Every mistake will be magnified, every gesture interpreted. She cannot afford to falter. They will stop there for the night. She is not permitted to dismount. The carriage is her chamber now. Meals will be brought to her. She will be seen only by torchlight, through lace curtains. Mystery is part of her currency. Her worth is in what remains unseen. Not loudly, not for long, just enough to remember she is real. The tears slip silently down her cheeks and soak into the fine linen of her collar. Then she breathes deep, steady, the way she was taught, the way queens breathe, the way survivors breathe. And yet beneath all the rehearsal there is a voice, soft but steady, that whispers, "You are still you." The air smells of roses and endings. What does it mean to be raised like royalty, only to be sent away as currency? This is a farewell. Tonight, a princess leaves the court. Her appetite is thin, frayed by the unraveling day. She thinks of her brother, still in the nursery of her mother in the tower, of the hawk embroidered on a pillow left behind. These thoughts settle around her like a cloak. Heavy, warm, impossible to take off, while she rides not on horseback, but in a covered carriage trimmed with blue and gold, the colors of both her father's crest and her future husband's. It rocks gently as the wheels begin to turn. The crowd watches in silence. Some wave, some simply nod. That he has a hunting estate with deer and a marble bath carved from a single stone, but of a garden and bare feet and laughter, the kind that echoes even when the walls are gone. These facts are meant to comfort her. They do not. Comfort, she has learned, is often another word for control. She stands in the center, surrounded by garlands and polished silver goblets of spiced wine, her hair braided into a crown, her face calm. The groom-to-be is not here. He is several days' ride away across the sea or the mountains, depending on which story is currently true. She is told he is kind, that he speaks her language adequately. Fireflies blink in the hedgerows. Fox darts across the path. She watches it all through the narrow slit of a window, veil still draped loosely over her head. The stars begin to emerge one by one, like distant answers to questions no one has dared to ask. Have you ever prepared for a future that was chosen for you? Her mother once told her, "We are born to walk away." That was years ago, before the queen was sent to the high tower, before her voice faded from court. The princess remembers her mother brushing her hair and whispering stories in a language no longer spoken in the hallways. She remembers lullabies that tasted of smoke and lavender, and a promise never spoken aloud that love could survive silence. She carries those memories like charms sewn into the hem of her gown. How do you pack a life you were never allowed to own? The nobles begin their farewells. Countess offers a veil embroidered with tiny silver stars. She thanks them one by one. Can something break even when it never belonged to you? When the sun finally dips, the procession begins. Her handmaidens lead the way, followed by guards in formal dress, then the cart bearing her trunks. The palace gates open slowly, then close just as slowly behind her. She doesn't turn to look. Not because she is cold. Is goodbye still goodbye if you never had a choice? The road is long, for hours. There is only the sound of hooves, the creak of the carriage, and the hush of the countryside waking up to dusk. Beside her, a lady-in-waiting dozes. The princess remains still. Have you ever held on to yourself while being told to become someone else? In the distance, the lights of a village shimmer like a necklace on the neck of the valley. She eats sparingly. A bit of bread, a bite of cheese. Have you ever missed a place you knew you would never return to even before you left? Later, when the camp is quiet and the fire outside the carriage dims, she finally allows herself to cry. And as sleep comes in heaven and strange, she dreams not of her destination, nor of the court she left behind. And you, dear listener, what part of you would you carry with you if you had to start again? Hope stirs quietly in the royal physician's chamber, where candlelight pools on parchment and a storm murmurs through the window panes. The physician moves slowly, carefully grinding dried herbs into powder hyssop, lavender, willow bark. The court sleeps, or pretends to. But inside the king's bedchamber, servants wait with pale faces and tightly folded hands. The monarch has not risen today, not even for mass, not even to speak. Depending on whom you ask, the king is ill, cursed, chosen, or broken. A tremble in his hands months ago. A moment at court when he repeated a sentence as if it were new each time. It's the day he failed to recognize his brother, small cracks. Passed off his fatigue. Now, they deepen into fissures no one can plaster over. And still he wears the crown. He is still king, legally, officially, even as reality drifts further from him with each hour. Others say it is the guilt of past wars catching up with him. He consults only with his most trusted advisors. But the truth peeks through in strange ways. A decree is signed with the wrong year. A missive is sent to a dead duke. At a feast, he lifts a goblet and toasts to a victory from 30 years ago. Everyone claps, smiles, pretends. A few speak quietly of his grandfather, who also took to muttering in Latin and staring at walls. A pattern. A bloodline flaw. Something best not spoken of, lest it seem prophetic. The scholars debate. The bishops pray. The nobles hover. No one says the word madness. Not aloud. Not where the walls might hear. This is not a mere fever. This is something older, something harder to name. The physicians whisper of humors out of balance, of celestial alignments, of a soul weighed down by invisible burdens. The fire burns low, he lies still. The physician returns with a new tonic. Willow, bark, and valerian. Administers it carefully, watching the king's throat as he swallows. One boy says the king spoke to a tapestry for an hour, believing it to be his mother, as if the entire palace is holding its breath. No announcement is made, no change is declared. Yet everyone senses it. The throne is still there, but its occupant, ... is elsewhere. Is it winter, he asks? I dreamed of snow. The physician nods. Not yet, your majesty. The king frowns, then closes his eyes. He does not sleep, but he disappears anyway. He laughs once, at a joke no one else understands. In the scriptorium, the historian does not write today. She waits. She listens. Some stories, she knows, are not written in ink, but in absence. These glimpses offer hope and also pain. They are reminders of who he was, who he might still be, who he is, flickering behind the veil. Another says he heard him crying, not the deep cries of grief, but the high, broken weeping of a child. The guards grow nervous. The pages speak in lowered voices. Power becomes a thing to tiptoe around, not serve. The king is awake. He eats when prompted. But his eyes look through people. He speaks slowly, or not at all. She sits beside him, her hands folded, her eyes searching. She must decide, preserve the illusion, or prepare the court. A younger noble is asked to observe court proceedings. The candle wax pools near her hand. She addresses it to her son still away, still unready. She asks him to come quietly, to observe, to wait, not to act. Not yet, but soon. She does not seal the letter with the royal crest. It's just her own, small, private, intimate. A bishop suggests more prayer. The steward recommends rest. Always rest. The queen watches all of them. She knows how power moves in a vacuum. She has seen it before. She has wielded it herself. Some kings have ruled for years through councils, figureheads, shadows behind curtains. But this king has always been ... central. Loved, feared, touched by something sacred. Can a throne remain steady when the mind behind it begins to drift? She speaks gently of the gardens, of his favorite hawk, of the prayer he used to recite before supper. He nods. Once. Then again. Then turns away. She does not cry. She simply adjusts the blankets, then rests her hand on his. The touch lingers. He is not gone, but not fully present either, within a court built on presence that is the most frightening thing of all. What happens when the mind of a king begins to slip like a page torn by wind? They call it melancholy, or divine punishment, or possession. But some remember. Have you ever watched someone slowly vanish while their body remained? The queen is summoned. Later, she speaks with the steward in the outer corridor. Her voice is calm but edged. In the halls, rumors take root like ivy. Some say it's a spell cast by a rival kingdom. The court masks it as fatigue. The king is resting more. You ever held a silence too heavy to carry alone? Some of the servants begin to avoid his chamber, not out of cruelty, but fear. Yet amid the confusion, the king has moments of lucidity. He recites a poem from memory. He praises a servant by name. What is more painful, the absence of someone, or their uncertain return? The council begins to shift. She writes a letter late at night. Sometimes the softest gestures carry the sharpest weight. In the king's chamber, the light shifts with the storm. Shadows crawl across the stone floor. Afterward, the king speaks slowly, as if pulling words from water. And you, dear listener, what do you dream of when the seasons blur and time bends? That night, the court continues as usual. Dinner is served, dances are held, petitions are read. Good, everything is quieter. Slower in the chapel, a candle is lit for clarity. And in the king's chamber, the wind murmurs through the window like a lullaby for someone far, far away. And you, dear listener, have you ever stood at the edge of someone's mind and whispered, "I'm still here"? The lantern's glow softens as the procession winds its way through the lower courtyard, moving slowly under a sky the color of pewter. The horses step in perfect rhythm, their hooves muffled by thick straw laid across the cobblestones. Loaks flap gently in the wind. At the front of the line rides the steward, who'd drawn low. The words are too final, too heavy. Instead, they speak in euphemisms. The long sleep, the veil. He has passed into God's hands. But the body still, pale. And wrapped in linen beneath layers of gold-threaded cloths, peeks the truth without a single sound. A monarch is gone. And with him, an entire chapter of the kingdom begins to close. Behind him, a cart covered in black velvet. No trumpets sound. No banners fly. This is not a parade. This is a passage. She remembers the early days. The laughter before duty thickened around them. The long silences later, punctuated by a single glance that said everything and nothing. But already discussions spiral. Who will serve as regent, if needed? Which alliances must be reinforced? Which enemies will smell weakness? And in those final months, the touch of his hand frail, uncertain but seeking hers. She had held it. She had not let go. The vigil kept at all hours. Candles lit. Psalms whispered. Already, artisans are carving a new effigy for the tomb. Priests polish the reliquaries. The historian begins to write, not of the man, but of the memory. Edges softened, deeds framed. A life reshaped into legend. A moment when doors swing open or shut. Some will rise in the coming days, others will fall. But for now, they bow their heads and speak of loyalty. Their words ring hollow in the marble chamber. The king has died. Not because she is alone, but because this is a walk only she can make. The chapel is crowded, but the silence is total. Even the children, tucked beneath their parents' arms, do not cry. The court does not say it aloud, not yet. His piety. Some are true. Others are stretched like gold leaf over stone. The queen does not flinch. She has heard such words before at other funerals, other halls. but this one is different. This one is hers. But in the gardens, a single rose blooms early, out of season. The gardener notices but says nothing. In the tower, the old queen prays over her embroidery. In the nursery, a child asks if the king will wake up. Governess says, "No, dear heart," but he still watches. The child nods, half believing. People must eat, even in mourning. A boy new to the castle asks why they must polish silver for a feast when the king has just died. An older cook answers without looking up, because the living still live. What does a crown become when no one wears it? That grief, though vast, cannot halt hunger. And in the simple act of slicing an onion or folding a napkin, some find steadiness. The body will lie in state in the chapel for 9 days. Yet those closest to him, the queen, the steward, the pages who dressed him, the guards who stood by his chamber door, do not yet speak in past tense. In the chapel, the candles flicker wildly. One goes out, then another. The body lies untouched, cold, crown placed gently beside it. For many, this king was the only ruler they've known. His image stamped on their coins, painted in their halls, embroidered into the crests above their doors. Now, that image begins to change, not gone, but shifting, becoming myth. The velvet beneath him is damp with the breath of 1,000 prayers. For them, the body is not yet history. It is loss. Personal, strange, and disorienting. They walk more slowly. They answer questions more quietly. The castle moves, but with a limp. The locket he once gave her hangs at her throat. It is closed. She does not open it now. Not yet. The room is filled with flickering candlelight, casting shadows on the vaulted ceiling. The windows above glow faintly with the last of the sun. Outside, the court prepares for transition. Inside, she prays not for answers, but for quiet. Have you ever moved through a day that felt like a dream? Not because it was sweet, but because it was too real? In the chapel, the queen kneels alone. Her veil is thick, obscuring her face. Their marriage was never simple, but it was theirs. How do you grieve someone who is both a stranger and your constant? Elsewhere, the council convenes. Succession must be confirmed. The heiress, son still young, still untested, will be crowned soon. The courtiers arrive in black, but their eyes are bright. A funeral is a hinge. Is there anything more delicate than power before it is claimed? Downstairs, the kitchens continue to work. Bread is baked, broth is stirred. It is a strange comfort. The idea that routine survives, that bread still rises, that feet still walk. Have you ever done something ordinary just to remember who you were? On the 7th night, a storm rises. Wind howls through the battlements. The guards wrap themselves tighter in their cloaks. Outside, the people gather at the gates. Some kneel in the mud, some sing. Some simply watch, silent and unreadable. What remains of us when the names are worn smooth by time? Finally, the day of burial arrives. The casket is carried by 12 knights, their armor blackened, their faces grim. The queen walks behind them, unaccompanied. The bishop speaks. He names the king's virtues, his wisdom, his mercy. As the casket is lowered into the tomb, a final bell tolls. Low, slow, final, and you, dear listener, have you ever heard a silence so deep it echoed in your chest? The tomb is sealed, the crown placed on a new brow. The court begins again. History begins the moment breath ends. But memory lingers. What have you laid to rest, and what still waits to be named in the dark? Hope stirs quietly in the first golden light of morning, slanting through the eastern windows of the royal chapel. The bells have not yet rung. The servants have not yet stirred. But the silence no longer feels heavy. It feels expectant. The king is gone. Yes, but life impossibly and inevitably. Not one from a noble, nor a bishop, nor an ambassador. But a letter from her daughter, now a mother herself. It is simple, full of small details. They do it anyway. The blooms are too heavy. Petals fall like velvet tears. One gardener sets aside a single blossom deep red. Her eyesight is fading, but her stitches are still even. The shape forming now is not a bird or a flower or a crown, but a spiral. A slow, continuous curve that turns inward and outward at once. She runs her fingers over it, nods, and begins the next thread. But the soft things are what make us human. Then she closes the book and draws the curtain back to let in the sun. Almost black at the edges, Anne places it in a clay cup at the chapel door. No one sees him do it. No one asks why. But it stays there all the same, catching the light. They laugh loudly, oblivious to succession, to ceremony, to history unfolding around them. One child trips and falls, the others help her up. No lesson, no order, just instinct. The kite catches the wind again, soaring higher than expected. She writes in her private book, the one kept in a locked drawer, the one no one reads but her. He has inherited more than land or title. He has inherited memory, expectation. Ghosts, yes, but also seeds. She writes about the time the king wept after his daughter's wedding, about the page who sang lullabies when the bells rang at dawn. A harp, a voice, a song without words. The kitchen bakes spice bread. The chapel bells ring once, then fall silent. The world is still. He picks up a book once owned by his father. The pages are worn, notes scribbled in the margins. He reads a sentence aloud. That stories do not close when pages run out. That power, for all its weight, cannot crush the tender truths tucked into moments of quiet. A crown is passed. A name is remembered. A new story begins. It is a line from a poem, one his father once recited at a feast. He smiles not because it is beautiful, but because it feels familiar. He places the book back gently, then turns to the window. About the queen who hummed to herself while adjusting her gloves. Freedom without performance. She crosses herself and continues on. These are not details for records, but they are truths. The baby's first tooth. The new nursemaid's kindness. A recipe for honeyed cake remembered from childhood. She reads it twice, then folds it carefully and places it in a carved box full of other letters. This, she knows, is how legacies survive. Not only in proclamations, but in the quiet act of remembering. Continues. The walls still stand. The fires are still warm. The floors still remember footsteps. And outside, a new season begins. The new monarch is not yet crowned, but the rhythm of rule has already begun. He rises earlier than expected, eats little, speaks less. The crown has not yet touched his brow, but he already feels its weight. In the antechamber, pages rehearse his titles. The scribe prepares the first official decree in his name. It is short, measured. We thank you for your prayers. We honor the past. We face the future. The wax seal is still warm when it is carried through the hall. What does a name become when spoken by 1,000 mouths all at once? In the queen's chamber, a fire is rekindled. She sits by the hearth, a letter unfolded in her lap. She brushes her hair, slower now. There are more silver strands than before. But she smiles at her reflection, not out of vanity, but out of recognition. She has weathered years of silence, of ceremony, of storms both public and private. And now, without noise or announcement, she has stepped into something else. Not power, not peace, but presence. Have you ever met yourself again after thinking you had been lost? In the courtyard, the gardeners begin pruning the rose bushes. It is too early, the steward says. Up in the tower, the former queen finishes a page of embroidery. What patterns do we leave behind that others may never understand? The historian, too, writes. But today, she does not write in the official chronicle. She writes, perhaps history does not remember the soft things. Have you ever written something no one else would read, just so you wouldn't forget? Outside the palace, a group of children run through the outer fields, chasing a paper kite stitched from scraps of old parchment. A nun walking nearby pauses and smiles. She sees in their play what cannot be taught in court. Joy without permission. Sometimes the truest rituals are the ones no one plans. Later, the young king stands alone in the royal library. The sky is clear, the horizon wide. Can the future grow from soil rich with the stories of the past? Evening arrives again. The castle glows with torchlight. The halls echo softly with music, not grand, but quiet. And in that stillness, something stirs. Not grief, not ceremony, but a kind of soft knowing that life does not end with a death. Perhaps we haven't changed as much as we imagine. Thank you for being here. Sweet dreams.